So welcome to the Ocean Data Challenge. This is night 1 of 2. We will proceed with the second night a week from tonight, and we'll talk about that more later. First, we'd like to recognize that we're on the land of Mi'kmaq, the land of Mi'kmaq, and the data that we talk about tonight and the land that we are living on is the ancestral land of the Mi'kmaq. And we also want to acknowledge that we are all treaty people. Tonight's agenda is fairly structured because we want to make sure there's a couple of things that you get a chance as an audience to learn a little about our speakers and that you get a chance to ask lots of questions during this. The other big thing to know is you might not come up with every question you possibly have. So if there are questions later on, feel free to send us emails and we'll get into that. So don't feel pressure to remember everything, to write down everything. This will be recorded and will be publicly available for you later on, and we're going to follow up with some other materials. In terms of our introduction, I'm going to ask Tanya to do a quick introduction of COVE, and then I'll tell you a little bit about DeepSense.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. Good evening. So my name is Tanya Lush, and I'm the Director of Workforce Development at COVE. And joining me is my colleague, Michael. Michael, everyone, there's Michael. He's our Education and Outreach Manager at COVE. So for those of you that don't know COVE, COVE is a world-class innovation hub where we bring people, programs, and tech advances together to build the blue economy, which is actually booming right now, as you all might know. So we work locally, but we also have a very national and international reach. Our work with partners allows us to engage across our vast sector and to connect with marine tourism, fisheries and aquaculture, marine transportation and energy, and the marine defense and security sector. COVE fosters the development of an engaged workforce, which is what Michael and I run as Workforce Initiative. We focus on ocean industries to meet the current and future needs of the workforce and the talent pipeline. Through programs and projects we run at COVE, such as this Ocean Data Challenge, we're pleased to partner with a number of stakeholders, which allows us to do such work. And of course, none of this would be possible unless we did collaborate and partners with entities such as DeepSense. So thank you, DeepSense, for this collaboration. And we're really happy to be on board for this Ocean Data Challenge.
Excellent. And COVE is one of our biggest partners. And the reason why we have such great partnership is all of the things that Tanya just talked about and the companies that they partner with, and that's where DeepSense tends to come in. We really help ocean sector companies understand and use data with the goal of migrating the ocean sectors to using more artificial intelligence and machine learning. We do that by partnering with students and academic researchers and those companies and try to build out really interesting novel AI. And sometimes also it's doing analysis and dashboards and lots of interesting things. And that's why bringing COVE and DeepSense together is a really great opportunity to help students learn more and more about the ocean sector, ocean data, and the ocean economy. We're going to talk about the Bedford Ferry a little bit, and so I won't touch on a whole lot here, but at a high level, the whole concept that we're talking about tonight is to gather around the idea of the proposed or the approved or the drafted out Bedford Ferry. Shannon might have better terms. I just want to make sure I'm not saying the wrong thing. The Bedford Ferry is going to be part of the rapid transit strategy for Halifax. And there's a proposed route. There's a couple of different versions that have been identified, or at least one, but tonight we were hoping to really talk more about the Mill Cove, which is the top left one on that map. And the map also includes some of the other existing ferries like Alderney and Woodside. Currently, there is a $3.3 million planning phase. And the other big thing that, so Shannon will share interesting info about Halifax, and then Sue will talk about this last piece as well, a little around electric boats. And so the ferry, the goal is that there will be electric and that the transit terminal will be net zero and will be really energy efficient. And so there's lots of really great approaches for you to consider as you start talking to your team or developing a concept for how you want to tackle this. The overall challenge is very broad, and sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad for you, depending on what you're trying to figure out how you want to solve a problem. But what we want you to do, and this is your challenge, is to use ocean data to explore opportunities within the proposed Bedford Ferry concept and help transform the daily commute of thousands of people who live in HRM. Of course, that is extremely big, but we want to try to streamline it into 3 different themes. And The goal too is that you try to stick within one of these themes if possible. You can think about under the water. So things that exist, whether it's fish, whether it's the data associated with water, and we'll talk about that a little bit, the chemical makeup of water, how things move through the water, on the water. So the surface level, we'll talk a little about things like wind speeds and wave heights. And then around the water, you can think about the people, how things move, how they operate, what that ferry system looks like. There's a whole range of things that can focus on those specific aspects, but we try to drill down into 3 themes to help you think about how you can streamline your thought process for how you're going to tackle this challenge. More specifically, when we get into under the water, these are very broad topics, and you don't have to find one specific answer that fits within these questions, but these are ideas we want to throw out to you. So things like, what impact would a new ferry have under the water? Is there anything you can think about that's under the water that lives under there? Are there measurements that currently may be made or should be made in the future that will help understand what's happening with an incremental ferry in the harbor? On the water, let's think about how the city is going to evaluate things as ideas. So is there a certain type of design for a ferry that would be great? How it should operate? Different types of movement and migration of other people within HRM when a new ferry comes on. And then when we think about around the water, so think about people who might use it, how they might get to a new ferry, where you'll see an increase or decrease in usage of people and movement of people, how you can get people to start using the ferry. There's a whole range of things, everything from city planning and urban planning to marketing and communications to ocean sciences, data and analytics. There's all sorts of different ways that you can look at this and approach this. And sometimes finding people from different backgrounds that might know a little about each of those topics and putting them together on a team can be a real winner when it comes to you pulling together something that's really interesting, insightful, and then presenting that solution. To help us try to dig into all of these things a little bit more, we have 3 speakers tonight. And Sue Molloy is the president of Glass Ocean Electric. We have Shannon Miedema from the HRM, and she's the Environment and Climate Change Program Manager. And then Callahan Murphy is a project manager for new initiatives at COVE, the Center for Ocean Ventures. And so as we talked about, or as I talked about just a little bit ago, thinking about the glass ocean and electric boats, then thinking about what HRM is talking about from a climate change standpoint, and then Cal's going to reference all of the different aspects related to data, new initiatives, and what COVE does with data. It could be super interesting to see if you want to cover one of those type of areas, or if you want to try to cover all 3 of them. So with that, we're going to hand it on over to Sue, and Sue is going to give us a chat about electric vessels.
Okay, so I did take the where your background got you to piece seriously. So I just got to throw in a little bit about background and how I got to where I got to. So a little bit about data collection in the environment. So I've been doing this a long time. It's really awful when you realize how long you've been doing something. I started at the university, which I think I just deleted that slide, but I also got into tidal power. And one of the reasons I got into tidal power is because all of my naval architecture and ocean engineering background was able to transfer directly. So my background is in ship propulsion and modeling and scaling of data. These are tidal turbine projects. So this is the tidal turbine I was part of, and then that evolved into this system. And the reason it evolved into this system is because we started to understand the data. We started to do a lot of research on the data, and people realized there are certain things that might be easier if you have a floating system versus a submerged system. So these are the kinds of decisions. It's a fairly big change in the system, but these are the kinds of decisions you can make once you do actually start collecting good data. I've done a lot of model testing at data, and we did fish turbine interaction, which was very interesting. So we put fish in the water, we put a turbine in the water, and we check to see how they interacted. So you can use lab environments to start to look at how does the environmental population, the animals in the environment, how do they get impacted by what you're doing? And then different technologies, different ways of testing. So I've spent a lot of time working with different groups on different pieces of data. And then a few years ago, I was able to start to focus on what I really wanted to do, which is to focus on electric and hybrid electric vessels. So this report was written, I wrote the majority of it, and I worked with EYE Marine and some other people on building this report. And we looked at what was the state of the art. And the thing that we realized is we were missing data. So the key to understanding electric boats is to understand the operational profiles. What are they doing, and when are they doing it, and how are they doing it, and why are they doing it? So you have to start to understand this. You can see there's two different lobster boats here. One of the lobster boats spends a short amount of time on shore power. One spends a long amount of time on shore power. One spends a short amount of time hauling. The other spends a long time hauling. So these are really interesting questions, like why are these different? And how can we start to work towards creating a general view of a lobster boat, because we don't want to have to make a custom system for every single operation, right? We want to know that we can build one lobster boat and all the lobster fishers can use it. So same thing with the ferry, you know, we want to be able to use it in the Bedford Basin and in the Halifax Harbor. These are the kinds of questions that you have to consider in the ocean. So this is the electric boat that we converted. We did it last summer, and we were testing it all through the fall. We installed our system for measuring. We measured power, we measured speed, we measured range of emissions, we measured the movement of the boat, fuel flow. We have a lot of different things that we've measured. You can see here, this is a probe in the exhaust on the boat so that we can measure the direct emissions right out of the engine. And this is another exhaust that we measured when we realized the emissions from the boat we were looking at were really, really high. And we wanted to know, was this abnormally high or was this regularly high? So this was another setup that we did in a different vessel. And then we also measured the noise. So we put this hydrophone into the water, and we drove over it at different speeds and with different propellers and with different loads. And we estimated what was the noise that this vessel made, and then how did it change when we went to electric. This is a profile of the boat that the kind of the typical boat that we are looking at. So the vessel that I showed you is a traditional lobster boat. So if you look at this data, it's got a lovely story to it. You can see that the person travels at using a lot of power, and then they slow down. And then this negative piece down here is not actually negative power. What it is the torque sensor on the shaft. The propeller turns the other direction because it's now going in reverse, because somebody has just slowed down so they could get to a pot. So you can, then they don't move for a little while, and you can see that that's because they're pulling their pot. Then they go to the next pot and the same thing. So you do that little small oomph of reverse that you do to slow down when you get to a pot. So you can count how many pots that lobster fisher has used or has lifted, and then you have the journey home. So when you look at that, you can start to build a plan for electrification. And the joy of data is when you also measure the GPS, you can see how this picture here matches exactly this picture here. And it's quite satisfying when you get that. I always throw that in just because I like it. So when we looked at this, we said, okay, well, how much energy are we using? So we looked at the operations in the green area, and we counted the amount of the amount of energy that was in that region. So power is what you use to make the power happen, to make the boat move. Energy is the amount of energy that you need to make it happen over time. So we said, okay, if you transit to site, you need 110 kilowatts of power. But when you are going pot to pot, you don't use over 40 kilowatts of power. So this meant that when we added up this green rectangle, we were able to figure out just how much power you use for the low speed operations. And we said, okay, well, let's make that the electric piece, and we'll leave the two pink rectangles as diesel. So that gave us a hybrid opportunity. Then we started testing it. And one of the benefits of testing at night in the Halifax Harbor, if you may not know this, is bioluminescence. So I just threw that in because not everybody knows it's there, but it is there and it is beautiful. And then we came up with numbers, and we said, okay, what is actually happening from a climate change perspective when we electrify a vessel? So we measured the speed and the fuel flow rate, and then we estimated a typical operational profile for a fishing boat. And we said, okay, if that fishing boat was hybrid, then per trip, we would be displacing 296 kilograms CO2. Over 100 days, that's 29,000 579 kilograms of CO2. And then if we look at this annually for all the boats that fit this profile in Atlantic Canada, we realize if we go hybrid only, we can save over 443,000 tons a year of CO2. So these are the kind of numbers that we can get when we start to add up all of the different pieces of information that we have. This is CO2 alone. We also have information for hydrocarbons. We don't have particulate matter, but we can get particulate matter if we can just get the machine working. And then we have information for carbon monoxide, for NOx, for SOx. We have all of these numbers, and you can come out and you can really measure what was the impact. The other thing that's interesting is we had the subsea noise, but then we came across this in Newfoundland. So the blue line is the rate of hearing injury or ear injury for the general population, and the green line is the people who work in the fishing industry. So this is something that really reinforces our argument that we need to think about electrification. What would be really good from a data piece is to know what is the value of this? How much does this actually impact our economy? Is it so significant that if these boats were all electric or hybrid electric, would we be eliminating these impacts on the health of people in our communities? So there's a lot that you can learn by collecting this ocean-specific data, and what I'm finding is that it is critical to building the arguments that we need to get people to support the work that we're doing. Our next plan is to pick a community like this in Nova Scotia and convert 10 boats. What we can do there, the opportunity we have, is to look at the impact on the marine ecology. When you have boats that are operating on electric coming in and out of this harbor, how does that impact the harbor? How does it impact community, the marine community outside of the harbor? How does it impact the people who live nearby when they don't have diesel engines idling for hours in the morning? And so there's a lot that you can look at from a data perspective that is very informative and helps us to understand our world a little better. One last thing is, because I've collected a lot of data and I work in a lot of research environments, I've been doing a lot of standards and certification work, and that's really important for us to be able to get the message out to people that things are safe. So standards are a way for us to create equity, that you're not you're going to put out minimum standards for things are safe. Critical for an electric ferry like the Bedford Ferry. We need to know that when people are on there that they're going to be safe, and that they're safe to the standards that the international community has agreed on. I'll skip that, and there we go.
Awesome. Thank you, Sue. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is Sue's done a lot of work on understanding all the data that has to be collected for vessels related to all the things she's presented, pots, and those are lobster pots. And so although that's her data and she won't be sharing that data, it's the idea of, at least I don't think she's sharing the data. No, she's not sharing that data. She's worked hard for it. But it's the idea of the pieces of information that feed into decisions around how you evaluate that. Does it need to be full electric? Does it need to be, how do you make sure you measure its impact? And there's going to be, I'm sure, some questions. So we'll move on because we have 2 more speakers as well. So Shannon's joining us from HRM. And Shannon, we just want to make sure I think you're able to share your slides. Super excited to hear your aspects and the challenges that you've had internally discussing how we approach this world of this new ferry. And I lost you. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know what's happening. 1 second here. I'm trying to share. It's not letting me share a PDF, but I'll try entire screen and see if that works.
Got it.
I'm in this really annoying Zoom browser. HRM doesn't allow real Zoom. So, okay, let's just see if this works for you. Can everyone see that?
Perfect.
Okay, Great. So thanks for the invite. Really happy to be here. As Jennifer said, I am Shannon Miedema and I manage the environment and climate change team for the city. We've got a lot going on. Hopefully some of you have heard about our fairly new climate change plan. We've had climate plans going back for a very long time, but we did a complete overhaul, and it's both a mitigation and an adaptation plan. It's founded in science, and it aligns with all of the targets of the IPCC, so the International Climate Science Community. And hopefully you all know what's happening right now in Glasgow in Scotland, which is COP26, the Conference of the Parties on Climate Change. Really the last big chance for the leaders of the globe to get together and commit to what it's going to take to really drive our emissions down very quickly at scale, significantly by 2030 and ultimately by 2050. And then also to prepare for the impacts that we're already seeing now that we know are going to get worse, even if we were to stop emitting GHGs today. So I'm just going to give a little overview of the climate plan, just high level quickly, and talk about what we're up to with the Fast Ferry project. So this is basically the scary scale of the effort that's required just within our municipality. This is for HRM. This is an energy and emissions model that was done by our consultants when we were creating the plan, by the Sustainability Solutions Group, which have done a lot of really amazing work for cities across Canada and elsewhere. And the top line is what would happen if we just kind of continue on in a business as usual manner out to 2050. From 2016, you could see we would go down about 33% of emissions. And what we need to do is get to net zero by 2050. So all the way down with that little bit of remaining emissions that are hard to get at that we would offset at the end of the day. And the different rainbow of colors really shows the wedges of actions that we can take over time to get to our target. And so it's all founded in what is possible now. There's no silver bullets that we're waiting for. So but it's accepting that there's some barriers that we need to get through to hit these targets. So the red is about retrofitting existing buildings. And then there's a whole bunch on renewables, both solar and large scale renewables. Then there's net zero new building construction. The electrification of transportation is the purple bar. Hopefully you can see that. That's what we're talking about today largely. And then the other actions are wastewater and industrial processes. And if we were to continue on this business as usual track, which assumes Muskrat Falls, assumes better standards for car engines and all that kind of stuff, we would blow our kind of ethical carbon budget that we have as a city. If you think of having like a bank account for how much carbon you have left to use up and put into the atmosphere, we would blow it by about 2027 or 2028. We have a really high intensity grid here in Nova Scotia still, even though lots is happening to change that. And we are a high GDP city. So we fall into that category of really being in a position to drive action quickly and follow the really steep decline that you see in that graph. So the climate plan has 46 actions in it. And really it's all about ACT stands for acting on climate together. It's really about us with all of our major stakeholders really working together to kind of throw away business as usual, innovate, and just really try and quicken up our pace. You know, we've known about climate change for over 30 years. We've been very, very slow to address the issue, and our window of opportunity is getting very, very narrow. If we don't have significant changes by 2030, we're going to be moving into a largely adaptation-focused world, unfortunately. So the 46 actions are grouped into 3 major bucket themes: decarbonized and resilient infrastructure, prepared and connected communities, and governance and leadership. And the red boxes are just ones that I think this type of really great data project or competition maybe fall. So decarbonizing transportation, greening government operations, coastal preparedness, and mainstreaming climate into everything that we do as a city government. So one of the targets that council approved when they unanimously approved the plan right in early pandemic days in June of 2020 was this target that we have set for ourselves as a municipality of net zero operations by 2030, which is really in a hot minute. And so that involves the full electrification of our corporate fleet. We have about 500 vehicles, as well as the electrification or, greening of transit, which includes ferries, a net zero new buildings, which we're about to commit ourselves to on Thursday through an administrative order if it gets approved by council. So we will only be building to net zero or net zero ready. We have to retrofit our buildings by 2030 to reduce the energy by at least half in the buildings that we own. We own over 300 buildings as well. We want to purchase local zero carbon electricity. We need to really mainstream the actions across our organization and with our stakeholders. We need to increase waste diversion. We have a great diversion rate here, but we can still do more. And then generate renewable energy where possible. So a lot of what we talk about when we talk about the plan, and climate is daunting and it's a big complex problem and it costs money, but it's really an investment plan too. There's a huge economic opportunity if we act now, especially if we act now instead of acting later. Because a low carbon future is proven time and time again to be a lower cost future. And the investments we make today will provide returns for us over time. So part of the modeling that was done actually had a financial component to it. And there was a lot of really high level assumption and estimations as part of that, as you can imagine. But it really showed, so the total kind of investment by everybody over the 30-year plan is $22 billion. But with all of the savings come with that investment in terms of avoided energy costs, operation and maintenance costs, avoided carbon pricing costs, and increased revenue from energy generation, we actually can see that by the 2030s, we're starting to really see a return on the investment. And at the end of the day, we should have an additional 21.9 billion in as a return on investment. So a lot of people freak out at the high capital costs that are required for something like the new Bedford Ferry, but the goal is to have financial returns at the end of the day. And it's not all about money, obviously, but that is an important part of the conversation. Municipal government lives on property taxes in large part, as well as some transit revenue and a couple other small things. So we need to be fiscally responsible to our residents. Also, there's a real opportunity to align the recovery from COVID with a green transition to a low carbon economy. We can invest in the right things and not repeat the same mistakes that we've made in the past. There's also a social opportunity. We have a duty to protect the public. We are working on building resilience and lifting communities up. We're focused on our vulnerable populations. And we know that climate impacts hit our vulnerable first and worst. And so we have a real lens of putting inclusion throughout the plan and with all the projects and policies and programs that we're doing. And we're prioritizing vulnerable communities in the decisions that we're making and the money that we're spending. And we know that building resiliency has all kinds of positive spin-offs for improving people's quality of life. And there's also the opportunity to reduce energy poverty as we reduce energy demand and costs over time. So zero emissions ferries, and I know we're going to talk about this a little further with the third speaker, but this was part of a really long conversation with the provincial government about a funding opportunity where we really wanted to get going on greening our transit system. And it was really the work of, about a couple of years in the making. And we ultimately got federal and provincial dollars so that we're really investing about a third of the cost for the approved project of electrifying the expansion of the Ragged Lake facility. So we have two big bus transit facilities in HRM, one's in Burnside, one's in Ragged Lake. There was a necessary expansion of the Ragged Lake property. So that's going to have the chargers in it to actually accommodate electric buses. And we're purchasing about 60 electric buses to begin with. We've hired a sustainable fuels analyst in the transit department to push the project forward. And they're hiring, I think, a manager this year for that as well. It's also driven by our large plans. So the integrated mobility plan that we've had on the go since 2017 guides investment in in really reshaping and modernizing transportation in the city. So active transportation, transit, transportation demand management, goods movement, roadway network, the whole thing. It's a really ambitious and large plan that goes out to 2031 that has some really great objectives to it. And the climate plan is depending on those objectives to have been realized over time. So it's it hinges on the success of the IMP, the Integrated Mobility Plan. And then it was mentioned we have this rapid transit strategy, which is fantastic. And that's really what's driving this third ferry route option, which we've talked about time and time again for I don't know how many years, at least a decade probably. So on my team, I have a couple of clean energy engineers. One of them is sitting on the working group and RFP evaluation team for the ferry itself, and one is sitting on one for the building to support the ferry, like the ferry terminal that would happen in Mill Cove. And they've received all of the proposals for phase 1 of the work just last month and are evaluating them, which is really exciting. I think when we talk about green ferries, there's electric ferries. There's also the potential for hydrogen ferries. So really I think what's required based on the funding contract that we have is that it's 0 emissions. And there's some other caveats: 25 knots, 150 passengers, fast turnaround, has to be fast, reliable, and frequent. We have done some studies before, and there's been past investigations about maybe operational limitations. And, even based on the responses to the RFP, there's still that heavy focus and comfort level with diesel. So we're really pushing the boundaries of current technology options, at least based on our understanding right now. But the industry really seems to be stepping up to offer the solutions that we're looking for. Just in terms of the timeline and the level of investment we're talking about, my staff mate put this table together, like $108 to $125 million. If we look at all those components of the moving this rapid transit strategy forward, and about 4 years. And I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions, after, when you're going through the project, if you have specific questions for me or my team. So I'll just put it out there. Thanks.
Amazing, thank you. And thank you very much, Shannon. That was perfect. I have so many questions, but we'll have to wait and until after Cal. And I'll try to make sure that it's everybody else asking questions and not me for my personal level of interest. So Tanya, I'll pass it over to you.
Great, thanks, Jen. So Callahan Murphy is with us here, and Cal is the project manager for new initiatives at COVE. So Cal is mine and Michael's colleague. He's a recent graduate from the London School of Economics with a master's degree in management and strategy. Callahan focuses on building new technical infrastructure projects with ocean technology companies. And over the last 2 years, Cal has worked on several ocean sensing data projects. So Cal is bringing with him today some good news and interesting things that's happening with COVE and all the wonderful things he's working on. Cal.
Awesome, thanks, Tanya. And Shannon, yeah, I totally have questions about this one as well. That was really interesting to hear. Wanted to do just a couple things with this. Just want to make sure, is that showing up fine?
Great.
Great. Awesome. So first off, I think it deserves just a brief conversation around ocean data and, a bit on the history of it and where it's come from, because it's really unique compared to other industries. And as we've gone into the age of information and the age of data, and that largely stems from the fact that it's really hard to work in the ocean. Being able to charge devices and get data back through telemetry and communications has been really difficult. It's kind of an engineering and physics challenge that has existed for a really long time. And the ocean kind of beats the living hell out of a lot of equipment. You can put in some very expensive equipment and buoys and monitoring infrastructure and platforms, and the ocean finds a way to corrode it or smash it with waves or tumble it around in the current. It's a really hard place traditionally to get data out of and get information out of. Now, that's changed a lot in the last 15 to 20 years. sensors and equipment had become significantly smaller due to improvements in battery technology and in storage and processing sizes, and communications technology has increased as well. And so what we're seeing is this traditional industry where sensors were big and bulky and largely only used for academic research projects or major national science research projects, sort of being democratized and being able to be used in a lot more industry focused areas, and being able to be used a lot more commonly and casually by technicians and analysts in a lot of different companies. And so that's kind of a space where I think COVE and DeepSense are working really well on, is helping build out that capacity with companies on the data side, because now they're able to create more data than they've really ever had access to. And there's a lot of opportunities that come with that. And so I would just say from personal experience, things even as basic as visualization and just determining what data should be looked at is definitely a value add here. You don't necessarily have to go all the way into the deep end with machine learning. There are a lot of opportunities in this industry to provide value just by understanding data and looking at it in a new way, and even just consolidating it and showing it in a way that has some sort of operational value. So I want to talk about one of our projects, which is the COVE Stella Maris. The picture on the right was a picture of it taken today. It's going back in the water tomorrow. This was a pretty large project that we undertook with about 25 different ocean technology companies at COVE. And it's really predicated on the concept that for ocean technology companies that are developing sensors and data services and products, it's incredibly expensive for them to be able to get in environment testing of their equipment. Ship rates for going on sea trials and things like that can easily cost upwards of $10,000, $15,000 a day. And so we wanted to create an infrastructure that is nearby in the Halifax Harbor, that is wired back to shore with power and data, that allows companies to rapidly test and develop new technology and sensors. So this was a great thing. We first deployed it, I think it was back in June, and it's out now doing a bit of maintenance. And again, that's sort of where when I really realized again how much these things can get eaten up just by corrosion. It's pretty impressive how much the zinc was torn up on it. Anyway, so this is a really interesting thing, but it's only one point of it. It's only one sort of set of data, even though there's about I think 13 sensors on it. It's only one location. And so what we're really interested in looking at now is something that we're calling the digital harbor. So how can we have a better understanding of what's going on all around the Halifax Harbor? And for the Halifax Harbor, it's a hugely productive and important and busy harbor. And it's probably surprising how little we know about what's going on in it from an oceanographic or meteorological navigation standpoint on a minute-to-minute, hour-to-hour, day-to-day basis. And we want to be able to provide a higher amount of data streams looking into that. And so the main idea there is the concept of trying to build out many different nodes. So we're looking now with companies to build out 6 or 8 nodes that we could put around the Halifax Harbor, most of them being wired, but a couple of them being floating modular platforms that could help support a lot of the industry and operation that are on the go in the Halifax Harbor, and also maintain an awareness of sort of the ecology in the area as well. And so, for example, there's a lot of operations that rely on the harbor, everything from the Port Authority, all the shipping and transportation that happens both in the Halifax terminal and the auto port out in Eastern Passage, and the oil and gas and the Fairview Cove terminal. There's the operations with Halifax Transit with the ferries impacting them. There's a lot of marine tourism using the harbor with cruise ships, and of course the famous harbor hopper. There's Nova Scotia Power, which operates an energy facility on the waterfront and has impacts there. There's Halifax Water, which is dealing with effluent and wastewater treatment. So there's a lot of different opportunities for this type of sensing platform to provide more of a look into the data that is undergoing in the harbor. So kind of wanted to give an idea of what we're working towards and sort of what the type of data platforms that companies are currently interested in right now. But I also want to talk about a couple examples of maybe things to get your mind moving in terms of how you could look at this problem and how ocean data has affected marine operations in Halifax so far. So one of the projects we're also involved with is Smart Atlantic. Smart Atlantic it's really interesting. It's basically providing meteorological navigation data for the shipping industry. And so we work with the Halifax Port Authority, the Canadian Coast Guard, and the Atlantic Pilotage Authority. The pilots are the mariners who have a really good local understanding of the harbor and go out to meet larger vessels as they come into port and help guide them in and navigate them into the harbor through the approaches. And they go out for any of the cruise ships and cargo ships coming in, they help bring them in, and only will bring in vessels if it's safe to do so. So for a long time, they didn't really have great data on exactly what was going on with the weather out there, and couldn't really figure out if it was inherently safe to bring in vessels because they weren't fully aware of what the conditions would be like out where they were going to meet the vessels. And so they always took the more cautious approach and told the vessels to wait until the inclement weather subsided before they went out to assist. And there was a lot of losses in productivity and opportunity in terms of bringing in vessels, and also maybe not enough information to help reduce risk overall. So Smart Atlantic project was created to help both run a meteorological navigation buoy, which provides live data and forecasts for a certain part of the harbor to help these operations, but it also consolidates a few other port data points that can be accessed as well. So this is just a screenshot from the website. This lower green circle on the bottom there is the Smart Atlantic buoy. Here, this is the HK4 buoy, which is Canadian Coast Guard buoy with a wave height sensor on it. Then we have the Halifax terminal, and then the Fairview Cove terminal, and they have little meteorological stations there that you can pull data off of. This is one of the many sort of data points that I think Jen has provided a list of to sort of get you thinking about what opportunities there are with data. And it provides live data updated every 30 minutes, temperature, wind, waves, and current numbers. And then really valuably, it also provides a marine site forecast. So we're able to give predictions based off winds and wave heights and wave periods for the approach for vessels coming in. And this has been hugely valuable for the marine pilots so far to understand the conditions that they're going to be working in. This is the back end on it that you can access if you want to do a data request. This might be going back to my point earlier in that there's even a lot of opportunity to help make ocean data easier from a visualization standpoint. This is not a very user-friendly system, but this is a great way to pull back. I think it's about the last 5 years of data from this wave buoy, and that's really fantastic amount of data to look at it. And this is a bit of a proof on how much this website and data is used. You can see the spikes are generally correlated exactly with severe weather events. And so back during Hurricane Dorian in 2019, and there's a big blizzard in Newfoundland where there's a few other Smart Atlantic buoys. There's also one in St. John, New Brunswick. There's a significant amount of traffic on the site because we have everything from surfers to boat operators, pleasure craft owners, and also the marine pilots looking at this site. So it's really valuable for the community overall for their operations. And this is one of the interesting things that this data allows is that you can see on this map here of one of the approaches into the Halifax Harbor, on the right there in the yellow is sort of the main channel that traditionally vessels took into the harbor. Now, one of the interesting trends with broader global shipping is that they're moving to bigger and bigger ships, 14,000 container plus ships. And the depths required for that are greater. There's a greater draft to those vessels. And so having this data allows the pilots to be able to take different routes. So there was known to be, through hydrographic scanning, a deep water channel entrance into the Halifax Harbor. And it was not something that was used though, because they didn't have great information if it was always going to be safe to take based off of the weather and wave period. And now they've actually moved the marker buoys around in the harbor, because they now have the data consistently enough that it allows their operations to be able to use that deep water channel for larger vessels and in more weather situations, whereas they would normally err to the side of caution when they were using the main channel earlier. So I think this is a really great example how you can look at that and look at sort of the wave, wind, meteorological navigation data as it might affect the ferry's operation. And as well, there's also some fantastic data out there on climate change, GIS predictions for both predicted sea level rise and also with extreme weather events. So you can take a look and sort of see where there's impacted buildings and impacted land, because I think in something like this, as much as we really do want to reduce the potential impacts of climate change, a lot of it unfortunately has already been done. And so now we're a bit into the mitigation phase as well. So understanding maybe how some of these future predictions might impact the operations of Halifax's port facilities. So those are, I guess, a couple of thoughts of what we're working on for data projects, and maybe a few examples of where there's some really interesting data out there that you can pull from to get you started with us. So thank you for that.
That was great, and thank you. I wasn't sure how much you'd get a chance to get into some of those things. So excellent, Cal. I really appreciate that. I'm just trying to, I don't know why I've somehow just suddenly lost my ability to share my screen. I don't know what's going on here with Zoom. There it is. Just went away on me. Okay, so I have lots of questions, so I can only imagine the questions that others have out there. Please put some questions in the chat. The other thing we can always do is you can unmute yourself as well when we call on you if you want to raise your hand. But this is your chance to ask some questions of these geniuses in the world that they operate, and all of the things that might help guide you, whether it's because you're going to work on it specifically for this, or if it's something that can lead into a future project too. But it would be great to see if you have any questions. And since right now I'm watching right now, there isn't a whole lot. Shannon, I have one quick question for you. Oh, just one sec, I live. There's a question. Where can you have those data? So that's a really good question. We're going to talk about that in a second. So Cal referenced a bunch of the Smart Atlantic buoy data. We'll be sharing in the chat, as well as a follow-up email, a long list of examples of data of above the water, under the water, around the water, including things about ferry schedules, the Smart Atlantic buoy that Cal just referenced, some underwater sensor data. So I'll get into that in just one second. Awesome. Okay, so just as we're touching base here too, Shannon, is there anything that you can share related to some of the goals around size of a ferry and traffic, or volumes or frequencies of ferry? And is all of that still completely up in the air?
As far as I know, it's just those kind of high level points I had in the slides, which is like 150 passengers and 25 knots. And yeah, in terms of frequency, I'm not sure if that's been, I think there's a lot still up in the air, but I can circle back with my team and make sure I'm not missing anything. And I think looking at the RFP, which is a public document for what the work that we asked for, is probably where all the details are that we have at this point. But I also wanted to say that we have published through open data. We recently purchased a whole new set of LiDAR data. Before, it was like, from 2010 or earlier, and it didn't cover the entire municipality. So we did both bathymetric and terrestrial LiDAR acquisition, and we have new digital elevation and digital surface models now. And we're going to be using it ourselves to rerun flood scenario models, especially because there's all new predictions that just came out of the IPCC. They released their report in August, and it comes out like every 7 years. So there's like fresh new predictions that we want to use with our fresh new LiDAR and get some really good, because we're trying to do some climate hazard mapping and look at our critical infrastructure and prioritize what we need to do there. So anyway, that's all on our open data portal. I don't know if that's helpful to these folks or not, but I wanted to just
That's fantastic. Thank you. And I wasn't sure in terms of size and depth and things like that too of the ferry, but I guess, right, it's one of those things where we're looking at all options. So I'm gonna ask you a quick question, if that's all right. One thing I'm curious about is the fact that we're operating in all climates. And is there something too, when we think about electric and other types of more renewable sources, is there something that needs to be considered there, and how things can operate in the summer versus our winter and those extreme temperatures?
So cooling is a big one. And so I teach at Dow occasionally. I'm teaching a course right now. And one thing that I keep telling people when I discuss energy is that we live in a dynamic environment right now. The world is changing. We don't know what it's going to be in 5 years. And we know that our oceans here are getting warmer. So we want to make sure that any infrastructure we build can be retrofitted for change if that's needed. So it's really important to know how warm the oceans are going to get, because you use the ocean water to cool your ship. You pull the water in and you push it out, and then it cools the systems as it passes through. The other piece is anyone who's had an electric car knows that your range goes down in the winter with the cold temperatures. So there has to be some consideration of how do you warm the batteries in the wintertime, and will there be any change in range? So that will come from other deployments. We haven't noticed a lot with our system. The Norwegian ferries have been operating for a while, so I would be asking them for information if I was curious about how their batteries last through the winter. But those are the big ones: change in range and appropriate cooling in the summertime.
Fantastic. And there's a question: does the boat or the boat models are the boat models completely custom, or are boat models do they already exist and they could be customized?
So when it comes to boat design or ship design, we always borrow from what's been done before. So every new boat is built on existing boats. There will be modeling that will be done so that the initial customization can be done in a numerical model and on a computer and not in the water. So that will reduce a lot of the costs, but it will have to be customized.
Oops, sorry, I lost my mute thing. Okay, and then we got to thank you. And then Cal, over to you in terms of some of the data pieces too that you think that might be of interest to folks. So you've referenced a lot of the Smart Atlantic pieces and some land stations. Is there anything that, if somebody isn't necessarily from around the ocean and there's a world they don't really understand, are there a couple of quick definitions or ideas of data that are really interesting for people to know? So I'll use one example: wind speeds and wave heights. I did not even realize those were actually collected and calculated. So can you touch on a couple of those interesting data points that might exist today? So you talked about the pilot captains and their roles, but like, for example, how does that data help them, or how does it get used in the port?
Sure, yeah. So there's a lot of, I guess, interesting considerations that those pilots and vessel operators make based off of meteorological navigation data points. And so generally you have wave height, max, so they have like average wave height and then max significant wave height. So that's basically a prediction or a calculation of, every 5 or 10 minutes, what's the maximum height that was recorded, or what's the predicted maximum height that is possible based off of the current waves that we're seeing. It can kind of be calculated a couple different ways. And wave period is the period in between those waves. And so they're looking at a combination of the height and the period and the wind directions for whether or not it would be safe for them to take on certain approaches. One thing that I found that was really valuable to maybe get an okay understanding of this is you can take a look at the, there is a document, it's a little long, but there's a good section that break it out, is the Halifax Port Authority has a practices and procedures document that kind of outlines how ships should safely operate in the Halifax Harbor. And there's a lot of interesting considerations that you can pull from that for sort of this new ferry where there's concerns where, in the Halifax Harbor and in the Bedford Basin, a vessel has to have a max speed of 6 knots if there's other small boats around. And so you can start considering, how do like Wednesday night sail nights, which, if you ever look in the Bedford Basin, you'll see all the sailboats there on Wednesday nights. How could things like that impact ferry operations? And there's a lot of really interesting things that you can pull out of the port procedures and practices document that gives a pretty basic understanding of the rules of the road in the port. And that's a good one to look at. And then you can sort of pair that up to a lot of the meteorological navigation considerations.
Fantastic, thank you. And Shannon, there's a question. I'm wondering the exact location of where the ferry terminal will be.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, I think it's, yeah, I don't know if it's actually pinpointed or if it's just like the Mill Cove area that they're looking at right now. I don't know if land acquisition is something we need to look at or if we own the land, but I will circle back with the.
Fantastic, thank you. And then Cal, maybe you don't know this, Smart Atlantic, does it collect chlorophyll data?
Oh yeah, I can answer that. It doesn't, but Smart Atlantic doesn't really capture the, oh my goodness, I'm blanking on the term of that, some of those marine biological oceanography data points. However, through CEOS and the Bedford Basin Monitoring Project and Department of Fisheries and Ocean, which I believe you all have those links as well, those would be your best bets for sort of ecological data points.
Excellent. And I think there's probably going to be lots more questions that are coming through, that as people get a chance to kind of go through some of those pieces and walk through different ideas. So please feel free to continue to send them in or then email us as a follow-up as well. I'll go back to then our big piece around the goal here. So one of the goals we have is that you're using some element of ocean data or some data for you to solve one of these challenge streams or try to explore one of these challenge streams. And I think the other big thing here is we're not expecting that you're going to go and, Cal just talked about wind speeds and wave heights and wave periods and things like that. No one's expecting that you'll become an expert in that piece. It's all about trying to understand different concepts and ideas and learn something new about data and trying to take it and apply it. So leveraging some of the areas of expertise that you're strong in already as well and trying to translate that into one of these topics and challenges and see how you can try to help solve it, address it, knowing exactly what Shannon's talked about where we don't know fully where the exact location is going to be, but what that ferry can look like and how we try to solve. Cal touched a lot on the data, but one of the things we want to reinforce is when you come to present next week, your solution, there has to be some element of data that's been included. And this is the tricky part about publicly available data sometimes too. Sometimes it's very nuanced where you get down to the individual level. So wave period, you might be able to find every 20 minutes. Sometimes things are summarized to a higher level as well. But there's going to be lots of different things that we're going to give you links and data sources for you to look into. The Smart Atlantic buoy, so it's one of the things we just talked about. There's a link right now in the chat. So thank you, Lucia. This one is around tides and so tidal fluctuation. And if you were to talk to a surfer, they're going to know lots about the current tides that are happening here in Halifax and the surrounding area. So maybe there's something around there that's super interesting. And Shannon's alluded already to our floodplains and then water levels, and as water levels start to increase and what impacts that might have. And then also Cal referenced CEOS. So CEOS is the Ocean Observation System, and Canada has created its own first one in the past 2 and a bit years. And so they're up and running and they have lots of great data that's available there. And it's one of those things where, you might be able to find some things at a summarized level and some things that you can go and analyze yourself. But it's trying to use some data elements to try to solve a challenge. Our big rules here, there's not a lot of them and they're not really that strict, but we need you to come up with something. But it's really broad. There could be a technology solution. So maybe you've actually built out some kind of model of some sort, a prototype of some kind of technology or concept or idea. And a prototype means that it doesn't need to be functionally operational, that you have the ideas to click through to show us what it could look like. Some kind of visualization. That visualization could be an infographic, an analysis, a dashboard. or even some kind of a plan. And maybe you have a high level plan of something that can do to address some of the challenges that we've talked about tonight. But the goal is that data is used as part of that submission. We do require that you have the rights to use some of this information, the idea, the whatever. We really hope that we don't want to see somebody copying something and then translating it and repurposing it for their own. And also that you work collectively with a team if you have one, that we're respectful of each other's contributions, and making sure that you have the rights to be able to submit what you end up submitting. And that you can work solo if you'd like, or in a team of up to 5. We do ask, though, that you do not share any confidential information. We want to make sure that whatever you do submit doesn't include something that's from some private organization that you shouldn't really be providing, because you will be presenting it to the audience and the judges next week. And then the last requirement is that you're a full or part-time student, or you've graduated in the past 12 months from an academic institution in Atlantic, Canada. So we will be checking on some of this. So please just make sure that you really are a student or a part-time student, and as well as members of your team are as well. We have prizes. So we'll have an overall first and second prize, but then we want to make sure that we have great support and diversity of different types of concepts that come up. So we have a top prize for design, which means that it's not necessarily as technical. And then we'll have a top technical prize, because everybody has different skills and capabilities and backgrounds. So it's making sure that everyone has a chance to submit something that's based on their area of expertise and their area of interest. And then Sue just mentions that there's lots of internal and transportations. Oh, right. Sorry. There was a question. Standards around boat manufacturing. I'll read it out because there are people who will be listening to this later. There was a question about, are there standards for boat manufacturing materials? And Sue says, yes, there are lots of international and Transport Canada standards for materials and methods of construction for vessels. And sometimes I call them boats and sometimes I call them vessels, but I'm going to say vessels for now. Here's your challenge schedule. So this is where it gets a little tricky, and we've had a few messages from people tonight already about joining us online. This is the session online. Absolutely. We're going to post it so that you can see it and repurpose it or share it with others. But the other big thing is we want to make sure that you register as a team tomorrow. And there's an online form for you to register. And the reason why we're doing this is we want to focus the team and make sure that everybody knows who's going to be competing, and that we can assess for the week to come of how many people will be joining us. We'll confirm the duration of your presentation, because if there are 100 teams, you'll have less time to present, but the fewer teams, you'll have more time to present. So that's why we want to get back to you on Thursday to let you know how much time you'll have. And that's why we want to confirm the teams tomorrow. And then on Tuesday at 4 p.m., we're going to ask that you provide a submission. There's an online form for you to submit. And there's a couple of reasons why we do this. One is it forces you to be very succinct, and it's going to help you think through how you're going to present it, because you have to be articulate in your summary. But also then when we call on you and then the judges score, they can quickly go back and remember which presentation was which. And so that will help us know who was on your team, what stream or challenge you're going to kind of fall under, and then a bit of a quick high level summary of what you're presenting. And then at 6 p.m., we're going to regroup here a week from now, and we'll go through the overall presentations and judging. So all of this will be coming to you in an email, and then there'll be some links. So that means over the next week, we're going to email you with the recording registration. Tomorrow, you're going to write us back. Thursday, we're going to let you know how long you're going to have. You're going to finalize your design, and then you're going to email it to us. The links are all in the chat right now, and they will be made available again. And so if you have any questions at all, please be sure to flip us an email at info@deepsense.ca, and that's how you can get in touch. And if you have questions directly for our panelists and presenters, we can facilitate questions and answers that way, so they're not bombarded publicly from a bunch of people. We prefer that if you could just send it to us, and we'll help facilitate those questions, because there are others who might have some interest in some of those questions too, or there might be some things we just want to make sure that we get to the right person, because maybe there's someone else we know that can answer that question a little bit better, and it's more their area of expertise. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to let us know, or share, or flip it in the chat and let us know, and we can cover those off. The final presentations will be live. The question was, will they be recorded or live? And I'm assuming you mean like when you need to go present. So we have had this question from a few people who say maybe they're not available next week. If that's the case, then maybe get in touch with us. You have a couple of options. We could explore having somebody submit a recording in advance. Then we play that one for our judges. Then the alternative, though, is if you're on a team, maybe hopefully one person on the team would be available to present. Is recreational fishing allowed in the ferry route? Oh, Shannon, do you know that one? Or
It's
Cal? It's not.
No, it's when you put in a new ferry route, there will be navigational boundaries around those routes, and they have priority over everybody else. So right now, if you are a recreational boat and you try to drive in front of the Halifax ferry going back and forth, they will beep a horn at you. And after a certain number of times, if they, I think it's 5 or 6, they can legally impound your vessel. So you do not want to get a 5-horn blast from a vessel in the harbor. That's constrained to a shipping lane. So there you go.
Noted. So that's a good point, which means the shipping lane itself may change slightly in the harbor as a result of a new ferry.
It might have to, yes. And the navigational challenges will be very interesting there.
There is, however, very little recreational boat fishing in the harbor. It's mostly shore fishing. So it is a funny one, though, that it does have that priority.
There definitely is some fishing on wharfs and stuff like that on the side, but not a whole lot. But yes, a good point. One thing I didn't even touch on, which is the whole world of autonomous systems. And once we now have autonomous boats that operate in the harbor, but let's not, that's a whole other can of worms to open up. Any other questions that anyone has out there? There's lots of links, lots of data thrown at you. I think the only recommendation is just following through on some of those recommendations for the steps, but exploring ideas as it relates to things that you're interested in and some of your skill set. All right, I see no other questions at this time. So a huge thank you so much to Shannon and to Sue and to Cal for your time. Really appreciate it. It was lovely to hear all of the ideas and concepts and challenges, and all of you are working on such fascinating aspects related to the ecosystem here, just from an ocean standpoint, sustainability standpoint, Halifax development, Nova Scotia ecosystem development is wonderful to see. So thank you so much. And sharing, for those of you who are joining us tonight, our goal is to help everyone understand the ocean sector and ocean economy and know what potential we have here in Atlantic Canada to do some really fascinating things. So thank you for participating, because we want you to realize that there's massive opportunity for career potential in the ocean sector, and that there is so much ocean data out there that sometimes we don't always have the right data we need for a certain purpose and have to go collect it. But other times there's lots of data out there that we don't know it can be used for other purposes. So we're really excited by what you come up with and are thrilled that you've joined us this evening. Reach out if there's anything, but otherwise have a lovely evening and thank you.